More so, they're terrified by the fact that it was a melanated, educated man, because there is a floating video out there with Donald Trump that says that's their biggest threat. That was his biggest threat. He said that he had the most respect for melanated, educated men. Right? So these are some books on the truthers, and I recommend, if you are into the history of conspiracy, right? Because it's not going anywhere in this country in particular, you might want to just go and do some background research, right? If you think that our people hold on to conspiracy and get buck wild with it, you might want to research how it has radicalized white America. A Journey Through America's Growing Conspiracies Underground. Amongst the Truthers, A Journey into the Growing Conspiracy Theories of 9/11. Truthers, Birthers, Armageddonites, Vaccine, Hysteric, Hollywood Know-Nothings, and Internet Addicts. Right? QAnon, Storm is Upon Us, How QAnon Became a Movement, Cult, and Conspiracy Theory of Everything by Mike Rothschild. Ironically, you don't hear about QAnon no more. They have not mentioned it in this administration. Trust the Plan, The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Reshaped the World from a Pizza. Okay? The Complete Guide to Understanding Conspiracy Theories such as the Deep State, the Storm, and the Great Awakening That Will Make America Great Again. Right? So you're speaking about someone who has exhibited this mental myopia, right? This aspect of mental deterioration, right? Where he sees himself as God. He sees himself as a king. He sees himself as the Pope, right? This is someone who is so full of themselves in terms of reestablishing the brand of white hegemony that, yeah, this is their guy, right? He understands the assignment and he's executing on behalf of restoring, right, what they consider or claim to be their supremacy or their superiority, based on the fragility that they felt when they had to be under the rulership or the leadership of a melanated, quote unquote, president for 8 years. They said never again, by any means. Okay. We can see that there have been medical research thought pieces on the mental deterioration of people who are receptive to these conspiracies, in particular, the election doubters, the ones who said, you know, the election was stolen and they had every right to run down on the Capitol. Severe depressive symptoms exasperate the relationship between conspiracy beliefs and voting for election doubters, right? So there's entire thought pieces about the mental deterioration or the mental myopia of people that are tuned into this. And I find it funny and very ironic that while this person cosplays to be God, or this person cosplays to be the leader of Christian America, because they're attempting to implement a theocracy under a quote unquote doctrine called dominionism, right? And let's look up dominionism real quick. Y'all all right?
Definitely.
Dominionism theology, also known as dominionism, is a Christian political ideology that asserts the belief that Christians have a divine mandate to take control of various aspects of society based on their interpretation of biblical principles. It's an umbrella term encompassing various movements that seek to establish a society governed by Christian values and laws, right? So this is the evangelical play. They come under an umbrella understanding called dominionism, which is facetious in its definition, because dominion means, right? The allocation of dominion means, man, if I go to that horse and that horse sees the divine self in I, then that horse is gonna, you know, it's gonna give me dominion. It's gonna bow its head. It's gonna feel my spirit. You know, we have a tangible relationship. It sees that, it understands the creator in me. You feel me? Versus domination, right? Which is what they play because they represent a aspect of Christianity called Christendom, which was passed to them by Constantine, right? When he merged church and state as an emperor. right? There's a famous narrative, or again, the supernatural uh, transformation of Constantine. He encountered an apparition on the road. He was riding a donkey just like Paul, and he saw this apparition, and the apparition said, "You will conquer in this sign," and it showed him a cross. He thought it was a sword though, and he merged church and state, which was separate at once. And the state that he merged it with was the Roman Empire, because he was an emperor at that time, and they've been conquering under that creed ever since. So they're pushing the theology of the Prince of Peace through the barrel of a gun or the tip of a sword. That's not dominion, that's domination. There's a difference. So they're being very facetious with this identification by calling it dominionism, but they want to bring all aspects of quote unquote, social activity under Christian theocracy. Okay. Christian Sharia law is the best way to explain it. So, and these are Calvinists, these are Protestants, this is your evangelicals, right? Who are hell bent on the destruction of quote unquote the Zionist state to bring about Armageddon. They're rocking them to sleep as if they're friends with them, but they really need Israel to be destroyed in order for the prophecy to be fulfilled. Because both of them they're playing the plays to bring about what they consider to be their Messiah, right? So the Jews want to bring about Mashiach. So they have to build the third temple, which means that they have to destroy the temple of the dome, which means that they have to go and have an all-out war with Islam in order to do that, right? And then, quote unquote, the Christians are saying that Jesus, when he returns, he has to descend on Mount Olive, split it in half, and then go through the Golden Gate or the Eastern Gate of the Temple Mount, which is now walled off. They put a brick wall. The Muslims over there put a brick wall over there. So these are the things that these people believe in, and these are the things inevitably that they are marching towards, right? But again, ironically, when you look at the definition of MAGA, you clearly see, right, that it is the fifth highest ranking of the Church of Satan, okay, and it translates to witch in Latin, right? And yeah, guys, not the witches that you think is cool, right? Because the community, they gonna start telling me, no, that's not okay. MAGA translates to witch in Latin. MAGA in Portuguese means magicians, sorcerers, and wizards. MAGA in Japanese means wickedness, evil, calamity, and disaster. MAGA is a slang word in Nigeria, meaning sucker, fraud, victim, or easily fooled idiot. MAGA means lies in Zulu. MAGA means dragon in Sundanese. MAGA means sorceress and female magician in Italian, right? MAGA means magician in Spanish, right? All of these are the meaning of MAGA, right? And then we have this iconic photograph of quote unquote Trump standing in front of the St. John's Church. I don't know if there's any people in the audience who are traveling men and what have you. But ironically, he's in front of St. John's Church. And we know that, oftentimes when people speak about where they hail from, they cite St. John's, ironically, based on the relationship that the Templars had. But then you see Baphomet right next to this picture, and it's almost an identical quote unquote pose, if you will. And those are the Bibles that Trump started selling last year as well, ironically. So we're reminded about the Arab Spring, the revolution, right? The Arab Spring Revolution. It took place in the early 2010s. Let's get a real quick reminder of it. The Arab Spring was a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions that swept across the Arab world in the early 2010s. These movements, fueled by widespread anger over corruption, economic stagnation, and authoritarian rule, began in Tunisia in December 2010 and quickly spread to other countries, while some uprisings led to political transitions and the ousting of dictators. Others resulted in violent conflicts and ongoing instability. Okay. So there was many triggers, there was many things that happened or what have you. Ironically, we don't identify what we experienced in this country as an uprising, but I'm gonna give you some context. On or about these this 2 days ago, 5 years ago, right? May 29th, it was a Friday evening, and I was outside in Atlanta. Ironically, I was downtown by the CNN building when the riots broke out, right? I was right there. And I as a reporter, in my capacity of a reporter, I remained outside. I did not participate in the fracas, but I did report from it. And I followed the group to Buckhead, and they was tearing stuff up in Atlanta, and protests broke out around the country. Ironically, this was the same day that a solar flare hit, right? After 925 days of being snoozed. October 2017 was the last time that we had a considerable solar flare. And this particular solar flare coincided, and it announced the solar cycle 25, which is the sun operates on 11-year cycles, y'all. And for 11 years, it's weak, and for 11 years, it's strong, right? The solar cycle 25 started in December of 2019, and it hits its peak this year. Solar cycle 25 hits its peak in the summer 25. Science has already showed that there are indelible effects on anatomy, right? When solar flares pop off, they have already gauged that there is a psychological effect and there's a physical effect. If you have melanin, right, that effect is even more prominent. If you understand your relationship to the sun, my research has shown me that we're tethered to the sun by a subatomic particle called a neutrino and another one called a muon. These are also subatomic particles that you can find directly on the sun. As things happen on the sun, they happen instantaneously to us, not 8 minutes later, right? Instantaneously, we are entangled to the sun by way of these subatomic particles, 93 million miles away, right? Because in quantum physics, there's no distance. I observed these people activating and not even knowing why they was activated. They was just active, hella active in the streets, right? When this thing popped off. So a third state exists between life and death, and that suggests your cells are conscious. Some scientists say. I think I just put that there just to establish this fact that what the Western world has failed to define, they don't have no definition for consciousness and they have no definition for intelligence. Don't let them tell you no different, right? I've spoken to, the who's who of scientists and Western science, right? Western science has no definitive description of consciousness, nor do they have it of intelligence, but they'll give you artificial intelligence, but they don't have a definition, a working definition of intelligence, and they don't understand consciousness, right? Because they're Western. They have not implemented the hemi-sync aspect of incorporating Eastern hemisphere or Eastern philosophies. They don't acknowledge spirit in science. So how can they ever understand consciousness? How can they ever understand intelligence? Right? They're incapacitated. They're operating out of one hemisphere. And this can't be our competition, y'all. You know what I'm saying? That's somebody that's playing basketball off of one leg. That should not be a competition. Research shows that the human body responds to changes in solar and geomagnetic activity, right? So we bore witness to the American Spring Uprising on or about these days, specifically 5 years ago, right? And we all know the plaques that popped off. And I am not a fan of these sloganisms at all, right? At all. I'm not a fan of the we railed against I Can't Breathe as a slogan in 2015 in New York when it popped off with Eric Gardner. Shout out to Brother Rich. We was actively on the ground at those protests, attempting to appeal to people to not make that their rally cry, right? Because of the metaphysical implications that breath is spirit and spirit is life. And if you can't breathe, then you're telling those people that you are dead. And then they will acquiesce accordingly, right? You can't say that Black Lives Matter and then but you're dead at the same time through your own proclamations. It kind of cancels the other out. Nonetheless, right, the people were activated enough by one psyops to break another psyops, right? And the psyops that they were going through at the time was C-19, being contained in their house, practicing social distance or what have you. But even as they showed you in the movie Sinners, there's nothing that triggers us more than quote unquote white fragility, right? Positioning itself as white supremacy, we're willing to challenge it every time to see if it holds the muster, and it folds. And this is what we saw with this particular demonstration of the American Spring Uprising of 2020. Okay? Juxtaposing and, on the back of this particular demonstration. And I'm saying all this because this is the ire of a Donald Trump that fuels this particular antagonistic approach that he has towards melanated people in this administration. These are the reasons that he blamed himself for losing, because he know he lost, right? But he had to save face because he can't admit to him particularly losing to this demonstration with him thinking that he already put Obama to sleep, right? Because they treat Obama like Akhenaten, and they got in that and just they dealt with a level of erasure, so they don't have to remember that he was even in there, right? The desecration of statues, all of this symbolism, you know what I'm saying? All of this symbolism is eating away at the claim of supremacy. You feel me? They were being put in their position symbolically, if nothing else. And then they declared a war on woke, right? This is where they made their minds up and they said, never again. We don't like how this feels. And they were able, I don't know if they was using AI at the time, but they were able to project out into the future of what would this country look like, right, without a pushback, unabated. And, if we just fall back and allow this stuff to, exceed and proceed at the level that it is, they definitely saw themselves, on the losing end, accelerated wise, because they already know that, but accelerated wise. Ironically enough, these are sloganisms that they also hijack for their own benefit. They say that they're not woke, they say that they're awake, right? So they switch the vowels out and they go from, yeah, we not woke, but we awake. So they got a white conscious community, they got a white Christian conscious community, as evidence that we saw with the Billy, what's the brother's name? The Billy controversy. Let's just leave it at that.
Billy Carson with West
Billy Huff. Carson, right? West Huff, right? The awake community, not woke, awake, right? And then, as they always do, they finessed the people out of the position, because this is their always play, right? We're gonna wow you up, finesse you out of a position, then adopt it for ourselves. While we was telling you how bad it was, you know what I'm saying? The minute that you abandon your clothing and your cloth, the minute you take that coat off and throw it down, then they refurbish it and put it back on. Right? So there's so many thought pieces online about the woke right now. And when I started writing a book the day after the Super Bowl called There's a Thin Line Between MAGA and Woke, and now all of these thought pieces have emerged and given me so much more context. And it was really, it's a language war, right? The white man was losing his marbles in his minds because his voice was being stifled. And he understood that was a challenge on his spirit, right? Or his ability to express himself, full expression. So he's saying, look, I shouldn't have to watch what I say. I shouldn't have to police my actions, right? I want to go back to when I could say what I want and do what I want, because this is what I fought for. This is what I won for. You know what I mean? I got the bodies to prove it. This is his logic or what have you. Okay. One of the defining features of the social justice orthodoxy that swept through America culture between roughly the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012 to Hamas's assault on Israel in 2023 was the policing of language. Many advocates became obsessed with enforcing syntactical etiquette and banishing certain words. Wokeness, as it's known, introduced the asymmetrical capitalization of the letter B in Black, but not the W in white. It forced Romance languages like Spanish to submit to gender neutral constructions such as Latinx. It called for the display of pronouns in email signatures and social media bios. It replaced a slew of traditional words and phrases. People were told to stop saying master bedroom, breastfeeding, manpower, and brown bag lunch, and to start saying primary bedroom, chest feeding, workforce, and sack lunch. At the extremes, it designated certain words such as crazy beyond redemption. And let me say this, like, the opportunity was given for conscious community, for the conscious movement to be at the forefront in 2012, 2014, and 2015, when the quote unquote leadership of these movements were being established. So consciousness got hijacked and replaced with wokeness, and those people got in there with agendas, right? We saw it first with D-Ray, and when they got rid of the brother Seals and them in St. Louis, and it was supplanted with D-Ray and you know and other aspects of the LGBT community and women who were willing to front line while we was still in Harlem and consciousness was at home looking at it on Periscope and Twitter. You feel me? They didn't step up to the plate and they got swapped out. And as a result, like I said, because the conscious community is such a small sect that represented a overswell still of intelligence, especially with it coming from New York, though, yeah, everyone else that they left out, they banded together and they created a consortium. And Black Twitter and things of that nature, those are places that consciousness didn't necessarily exist. They was on YouTube, but they wasn't on Twitter. And I seen this whole thing play out on Black Twitter through the people who were ostracized from consciousness. So hip hop as a political vehicle, as a force, right? We've seen it at its apex during the Obama presidency, right? For the most part, we saw the embracing, we saw the overlapping of, you know, certain aspects of culture being accepted as American culture, right? This is the guy that we can identify to say, yeah, guys, this was the hip hop president. Hip hop helped him get elected. You know what I'm saying? He was lit. He had celebrity friends and what have you. They was smoking weed and why hot. You know, all that stuff they be talking about. You know what I'm saying? But it very much triggered a fear of a Black planet. And there was in the recesses of white America's minds where it thought that it had gotten past that. You know what I'm saying? Because it had seen, you know, the raunchiness and the shiny suit era and all other aspects. They thought that Black America had abandoned consciousness altogether. You feel me? But this brother who, again, a Harvard graduate, Harvard law professor, what have you, they like, yeah, we can't risk this. You know what I'm saying? We got to do away with all of it. Whatever went into making that nigga do away with it. Right? So before I jump that, let me get into this aspect of Obama and why were they identifying him? Why were they using this language? Well, they didn't call him a Muslim, they called him a Muslim. Okay, what is it that they saw in him that you have failed to see in him? Right? But you're still paying the price for it. To this day, when baby boomers were children, it was Muslim. That's what they want to say. The American Heritage Dictionary noted Muslim is the form predominantly preferred in journalism and popular usage. Muslim is preferred by scholars and by English-speaking adherents of Islam. No more now, almost everybody uses Muslim, but we know that's not the case because Obama was only referred to as a Muslim, right? And that's code language because they understood what I'm going to get into next. According to the Center for Nonproliferation Studies, Muslim and Muslim are basically two different spellings for the same word, but the seemingly arbitrary choice of spellings is a sensitive subject for many followers of Islam. Whereas for most English speakers, the two words are synonymous in meaning, the Arabic roots of the two words are very different. A Muslim in Arabic means one who gives himself to God and is by definition someone who adheres to Islam. By contrast, a Muslim in Arabic means one who is evil and unjust. When the word is pronounced as it is in English, Muslim with a Z. For others, this spelling differentiation is merely a linguistic matter, with the two spellings a result of variation in transliteration methods. Both Muslim and Muslim are used as nouns, but some writers use Muslim when a word is employed as an adjective. Right? Let me this last one. Journalists switched to Muslim from Muslim in recent years under pressure from Islamic groups, but the use of the word Muslim has not entirely ceased. Established institutions which use the older form of the name have been reluctant to change. The American Muslim Foundation is still the American Muslim Foundation, much as the NAACP is still the NAACP. The journal, The Muslim World, published by the Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, is still the Muslim World. So they were referring to Obama as a Muslim because of the suspicions that they had that he was a Moor, right? Or he was sympathetic to Moorish issues at the time. Because unbeknownst to most, and we know this by making observations of how they prosecuted the Miami 7 after 9/11. If you guys are not familiar with that, when they passed the Patriot Act, the first uses that they got of all of the new laws that they passed was a group in Miami called the Miami 7, who they identified as Moorish nationals and Hebrew Israelites, who they said were radicalized online by ISIS. Okay, and they tried them. They had three cases, and on the third, again, they utilized an informant to entrapment is what I'm looking for. The word that I'm looking for is entrapment, right? They use a mold to set them up and utilize entrapment techniques to create a case that didn't exist because those laws fell on their face because they weren't finding any domestic terrorists outside of their own domestic terrorists. You feel me? So they had to go after the the Miami 7. And if you follow that case and you follow the language and you follow what was being said, they were very, very much informed about what the Moors were engaged in at that time. And they were terrified by it because they were getting very close to some uncomfortable truths. Right. And then they had an entire area of the internet where the Europeans were saying that Obama was the Antichrist because he was the reincarnation of Akhenaten. And they were saying that Michelle was the reincarnation of Queen Tai. And they were looking at the children and making references and connections as well. And this is what these people believe. This is their mental myopia, okay? Or myopia, my bad. Please believe. All right. Mental myopia. We'll do a real quick definition. Mental myopia refers to a limited or narrow perspective in thinking, focusing primarily on immediate concerns or specific, often negative aspects of a situation or person, while neglecting the broader picture, long-term implications, or positive attributes. It can manifest as a tendency to minimize the complexity of others, categorize people based on a single characteristic, or prioritize short-term gains over long-term well-being. Right? So Obama did an address in Cairo where he spoke to the Muslim world and he brought up the Moors, right? He brought up the Moors and acknowledged that there would be no United States if the Moors had not acknowledged them first. We're the ones, or the quote unquote, the Sultan for that matter, of Morocco is the one to put all of this into motion by openly acknowledging the quote unquote United States. It's the same thing that you be seeing in the UN when they try to get them to acknowledge Palestine or the state of Israel. Coincidingly, at the same time that Obama was addressing the Muslim world in Cairo, Michelle Obama was at the Alhambra, right, which is the edifice that speaks to the Moorish domination or the Moorish dominion of Spain for 700 years. They built the beautiful edifice called the Alhambra. And that's where Michelle was at the same time that he was addressing the world or the Muslim world and reminding them that as a student of history and a constitutional lawyer, he was very much adept into the Muslim contribution into the founding of this country or the early stages and ages of it, right? So when we see Trump losing his ish versus Harvard, don't think that it's just about what they're talking about in terms of anti-Semitism. It's the fact that, once again, they have to attack these areas and institutions of education to prevent, right, these uppity smart Negroes from challenging their white fragility. Never again, right? Even if we got to burn the whole thing down, this is what we're not doing, right? Because they barely recovered from the anxiety that came from that. Okay. So, and again, this is not a Obama gloss over piece. I'm not saying that, this is the, we need to shellac him. This is the pinnacle of blackness or any of that. You know what I'm saying? I'm speaking directly to what has triggered them, right, to get in the bag the way that we have seen them do in this battle for the control, for the medium of hip hop and what it means to this country that we may be overlooking.